Je baleko, wasuze ocha, nasuze bolunji. I was talking to Carrie this morning before the service got started, and she said that she thought it was wonderful. I told her that I was making some little changes and tweaks to this right up until the last minute, and she said her favorite thing is when God has something on his mind that is right there in the moment. And then you heard Carrie say, you have an enemy who wants to lie to you about what's right in front of you. And then you heard Carrie say, just the song before that, she said, isn't it wonderful, isn't it a blessing that we belong? In my Father's house, there's a place for me. Put those two ideas together, we have an enemy who wants to lie to us, and it's a blessing to know that we belong, and in our Father's house, there's a place for us. That's my message this morning. So I know it's on God's mind, because Carrie and I did not rig that up. It came spontaneously out of her mouth, and now it's my turn. We are born with a sin nature, which does not mean that we take our first steps out of the crib and instantly go commit every sin in sight. We actually get tipped in the direction of certain sins by temptation. And temptation is not a natural random feature of the universe. It has a designer and a manufacturer. Satan is the tempter. And I get worried sometimes that it's easy to get the wrong idea about temptation if you read in the Bible the episodes of temptation, if you read about Satan tempting Adam and Eve, and tempting Jesus, and indwelling Judas when he left the Last Supper to go betray Jesus. We can get the idea that Satan individually whispers in the ear of every single human being. But what you have to keep in mind is that Satan is not a clone of God, only evil. Satan's not all-powerful. He's not all-knowing. He has limits. I don't think, and I think we could go deep on theology, and I could make the case to you with a little more time, that Satan whispers to 8 billion people separately, because that's beyond what he can do. Now, we are still no match for him. He's ancient, he's far more powerful, far more clever than we are. But what he does is he finds some very creative people and he weaves into the culture the temptations that he uses to ensnare us. Let me say a little bit about what he does, how he tempts us. Then I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Then I'm going to tell you why I'm here and why I have this shirt on. We'll get to the Bible passage I'm focusing this on, and then I'll have a few things more to say about temptation. Satan starts with good blessings that God gave us. And in particular, he targets places where our desire comes together with our fear. And then he lies to us. And if he can get us to misunderstand God's blessing with our cooperation because of our desire and our fear, then he's got us. Do you ever flip through the TV channels and think, who in the world could find any of this entertaining? This is garbage. Do you ever look and see what people are putting on that's fashionable and think, why is it that in 2019, nobody will think you're attractive if you're not throwing sex in people's faces? That's not by accident. That's Satan's strategy. Weave it into the culture, the temptations that he is going to use to make people stumble and fall. So, if you watch enough TV, watch enough movies, listen to enough music, you're going to get the idea that if you want to be happy, you need to have a lot of money and use that money to buy a lot of stuff. And if you want to be in on the fun and enjoy yourself with other people, then you've got to be very attractive. And being very attractive means that you have got to physically entice other people. You've got to talk in a way that's crude and vulgar. You've got to seek out pleasures of the flesh and pretty much live for those, and that's how you'll be included in the fun. And if you don't do that, then you're uptight and you're going to get left at home while everybody else is included in the fun. And you'll learn that if you want to be successful, then you have to make other people do what you want. You have to move up and up and up and become more and more powerful. It's the powerful people who are the successful people. Now, all of those began as blessings. God gives wealth as a blessing. Everything that causes you pleasure in your flesh at the right moment, in the right time, in obedience to him, every good thing comes down from the Father above. And as far as raising up leaders and the fact that we can persuade one another and change one another's minds, and sometimes we follow wise people and we learn from what they think is a good idea, that's a blessing from God. But Satan whispers to us about all of those. Most of us, we wouldn't mind having a little more money, and we're also a little bit afraid of not having enough money. We really like being included with other people and enjoying pleasant things, and we're a little afraid of missing out. We really like getting our own way, and we're a little bit afraid of what will happen if an important decision to us gets made by somebody else without what we want being part of it. But if you try to chase after those things the way Satan is deceiving you, deceiving me, deceiving all of us, ultimately, the things he promises don't happen. I think most of us could go home, I know I could do this, and I could look around at a bunch of the junk that I've saved up my money to buy, and I say, I got to get rid of a lot of this. None of it made me happy. I think I was 6 or 7 years old the first time I unwrapped a Christmas present, and 10 minutes later it was less exciting than it had been for the 6 weeks before that it sat under the tree. Stuff does not, in the end, make us happy. And when I have tried to be the life of the party, to be included with other people, to chase after things that give me pleasure, maybe you've seen people who do that, work too hard, try too hard, and really, if they just would be themselves, if they would live more simply, if they would be more comfortable in their own skin, they would be a lot more likable and they would be included with a lot more people. And then when I think about what the world would be like if I got my own way on everything, if everybody had to obey me, I would steer this entire world straight off a cliff, straight into an iceberg. It would not go well. So those temptations, they set us up to be really, really miserable. Now, I used those three. I used money, I used pleasure and pleasure with other people, and I used power because those show up a whole awful lot in the Bible. Jesus talked a lot about all of them. Jesus talked about money, Jesus talked about chasing pleasure, and Jesus talked a lot about lording it over other people. And we talk about those a lot in church. I used all of that just to warm you up. But I'm here today to talk about a fourth temptation, one that I think we talk about a lot less. Let me say one more thing about temptations before I get kind of down to business, and that is, I think there are moments in history where the way events line themselves up, certain temptations become very available to Satan, very useful to Satan. You could go back to the 1920s, and Satan tempted a whole lot of people with money and possessions, right up until the crash of the stock market and the Great Depression. He did it again in the early 2000s, before the housing crisis and the Great Recession. Around the time I was born and I was a small child, there was very much the late 60s and early 70s. There was very much an attitude of, if it feels good, do it. And Satan used that to tempt a lot of people off the path, and he tempted them into wrecking their lives. And then, of course, Satan tempting people with power and getting their own way, that one never goes out of fashion. But the one I want to talk about today, I want to talk about it because right now, 2019, I think it's a temptation that is very useful and very available to Satan, and I want to talk about it in some depth. And I want to send people out watching for it and being very much on guard for it. But let me tell you why I'm here. 51 weeks ago, I did this. I got up on Sunday morning. I've taught public speaking to college students for 25 years, but it was the first time I had ever spoken in my church. And the occasion was that for the second time in 3 years, I had gone to Cambodia with the Northwest Christian University missions team. So I came back and I testified to what I had seen in Cambodia. This year, school let out and I got on an airplane again, but this time instead of going west, I went east. I flew all the way across North America to New York, all the way across the Atlantic to Brussels, and then I turned southeast and took the longest of the 3 flights, from Brussels to Entebbe, Uganda. Then I got on a bus and went from Entebbe to Mukono. In Mukono, I was hosted for a week by Uganda Christian University. The occasion was Uganda has a study abroad program called the Uganda Studies Program. Many of you know Emily, formerly Emily Sanders, now Emily Rarick. While she was a student at NCU, she went on the Uganda Studies Program. I believe she talked about it here a few times, both before she went and after she went. But NCU has not sent that many students over the years. In the 15 years the program has existed, we've only sent 3 students. So Uganda Christian University invited NCU to send a couple of faculty to do a site visit so they could show us what the program was like. They took us off-site to some of the ministries. One of my favorites was Reach One, Touch One ministry, which reaches out to elderly people in the community, mostly women, and in the local language, grandma is Jaja. So they reach out to all the Jajas, and they make sure Jajas have safe places to live, that the doctors will actually listen to them when they talk about problems with their health, that they have enough to eat, and then when the Jajas are healthy, they take care of the rest of the family. And so college students from the United States who go to Uganda, they get to go participate with Reach One, Touch One ministry, and they get to reach out and try to make the community healthier. And we did probably a couple of dozen other missions in the area, and how our students, when they go and they participate in the program, get to pitch in and be part of it. We also did a couple of things that were fun. We went to we went to the origin of the Nile. You remember all the way back in Exodus when Pharaoh ordered that all the Israelite babies be killed, and Moses' parents saved him by putting him in a basket and hiding him in the Nile. And then God persuaded Pharaoh in part to let the Israelites go by turning the Nile to blood. The Nile is a very, very important place in the Bible. And it's also the world's longest river. And back in the 1800s, there was a challenge a lot of explorers took on to track the Nile all the way back to the place where it starts. Well, I have seen the place where it starts. I have been out in an excursion boat to the exact spot where the Nile starts. Would you like to see it? It is picture number 1. That is where the Nile starts. In the excursion boat, the captain said, okay, look that direction. And we did. And he said, see how the waves are going back and forth across Lake Victoria? Now look at this side of the boat. And we did. And he said, see how all the water is going that direction into that channel? This is where the Nile begins. And they put a sign up. And that sign says, the source of the Nile. Now right next to it, there is a big rocky island. And on that big rocky island, there is, can I have the second picture? There's a gift shop and a bar. So we stepped off the excursion boat, out stepped 2 Americans, each with a beer in their hand. And I thought, naturally. And we got back in the boat, and off we went. And that was one of my best experiences, I would say, one of my most memorable experiences on my trip to Uganda. Now, one of the things I try to do whenever I travel around the world and whenever I get to partner with fellow followers of Christ, fellow daughters and sons who are co-heirs with Christ, is I ask them, what testimony can I take back? What do you want your sisters and brothers in the United States to hear? What do you wish they knew? So let me take just a minute and give you the answer they gave me. It's not my focus today, but I do want you to hear it. They said, a lot of people in the United States, whenever they think of Africa, they think, oh yeah, that place where everybody's poor, everybody's sick, and everybody's trying to kill each other. Please go back and tell them what you've seen. So let me tell you what I've seen. I saw people who love where they live, and they live in a beautiful place, and they work very hard to take care of themselves and take care of each other. And they know that where they live, there are problems. And I'm looking at people who I think feel the exact same way. If I were to ask you about Eugene, I think a lot of you would say Eugene is a wonderful place to live, and we work very hard to try to make it the best we can. There are certain problems here, problems having to do with the schools, problems having to do with where people are going to live, and we work on those year after year, and they continue to be problems. There are places in Africa that honestly there is a lot of suffering and a lot of death. There are also places like that in the United States. The thing they asked me to convey to you, Africa is not a place where everyone's poor, everyone's dying, everyone's starving, everyone's killing each other. It's a place where everyday life happens. They appreciate your prayer, but you should know, I went to at least one worship service, they're praying for you. They're praying for us, and we need their prayer. So, that brings me then to the focus passage today. And the focus passage today, last year, is Luke 14:26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Last year when I did this for the first time, I decided to play it safe, so I picked a beatitude. Nothing controversial about a beatitude. If you've got a problem with blessed are you when you hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you'll be satisfied, then you're the one with the problem. This, on the other hand, this is one of Jesus' difficult sayings. Let me tell you just how difficult. I have a book. I meant to bring the book, but I got absent-minded and left it at home. I have a book that's entitled 13 Reasons Jews Do Not Believe in Jesus. That book was written so that rabbis who had a member of their synagogue hear a gospel presentation from a Christian would have something to read so that they would not become Christians. One of the reasons in that book, rabbis make the argument Jesus could not be the Messiah because he did not lead a sin-free life. And they point to this verse. And then they point to the 5th commandment, honor your father and mother. But Jesus taught his followers to hate their father and mother. Now, they're wrong. Let me very quickly explain why they're wrong. If you've ever had a really bad headache and said, oh, my head is exploding, your head was not really exploding. If it was, you wouldn't have a mouth to say that. There's a Greek word for what you do when you do that. It's called hyperbole, exaggeration to make the point. And there's hyperbole all throughout the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. The message here, the point here, yes, your mother and father are wonderful. Your wife and kids are wonderful. Your brothers and sisters are wonderful, and you ought to love all of them. But if it comes down to a showdown, I have to come first. Jesus is saying, if it comes down to a showdown, I have to come first. And any rabbi who has a problem with that teaching, I would ask them about, well, what about what God told Abraham to do when he took Isaac up on the mountain and built the altar? Do you have a problem with that? And if you don't have a problem with that, why do you have a problem with this? My point today, and the fourth temptation that I want to talk about, is the temptation of belonging. Because one of the things Jesus is saying here is any other group you put yourself in that is not the group of those who follow me, those other groups have to give way. But we want to belong. We want to feel like we know where we belong. And I think a lot of us feel a little bit afraid of not belonging. And where we want something and we're a little afraid, there's an opening for Satan to tempt us. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the lies that Satan tells us when it comes to belonging. First of all, let me give you 3 examples, just from my own observation. There are more examples I could use, but just to get your thinking started, I'm going to warm you up with 3. I'm a professor. I do that a lot. Start you with 3, leave you to do the rest of your thinking on your own. Example number 1, people from other countries. It's very, very easy, and there are messages, there are media messages, there are very loud public speakers who will encourage you to identify yourself with the United States, to pick certain countries, and to rule them out as enemies, and say, I'm in this group, they're in that group, and that is the way the world works. A second example, politics. Now, I'm not talking to any one political party because all the political parties do it. You belong to us, there's that other group. Not only are they wrong, not only do we disagree, but they are threatening our way of life, and they are our enemies. And a third example is people with a different standard of living. We have a real problem here in Eugene with people who either do not or cannot find a house to live in. And they're in a lot of different neighborhoods, and they're in a lot of different public places people try to go. And there is a danger sometimes that we think of ourselves as we are us, they are them, and we belong, and they don't belong. So now what I want to do, I want to talk about a couple of the lies that Satan tells us about belonging. Lie number 1, you know you belong when you feel comfortable. That is profoundly, profoundly unbiblical. If belonging was measured by how comfortable we feel, then Moses would not have had to go to Pharaoh. Jonah wouldn't have gone anywhere near Nineveh. And there was a rich young ruler who came to Jesus and said, what must I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus had him repeat back the commandments and said, and the rich young ruler said, I've kept all of those since I was a child. Jesus looked at him and loved him and then said, take everything you own, sell it, give it to the poor, then come follow me. And he found the point of the rich young ruler's discomfort. And the rich young ruler walked away. And what Satan is aiming at us to do is to put us in a situation where we put ourselves in one group and we oppose ourselves to another group. And in that other group, there are sincere, wise, Bible-believing Christians. But we still put them in the other group because the group we picked, a human-created group, is more important to us. The second lie that Satan will tell us is that you know you belong, you can judge whether you belong based on outward appearance, based on superficial outward things. When God sent Samuel to anoint the king to replace Saul, Samuel went to the house of Jesse. Jesse started bringing out son after son. They all looked like the captain of the football team. And Samuel said, it's got to be this one. It's got to be this one. And God kept telling him, no, not that one. No, not that one. And finally, God said to Samuel, stop judging by outward appearance. I don't judge by outward appearance. I judge the heart. Can we have the next picture, please? This is Alexis. Alexis is graduating from Uganda Christian University in about 2 weeks. He's going to have a degree in civil engineering. His dream is to go around Uganda to small villages where they don't have a safe, clean drinking water supply and to help them build a safe, clean drinking water supply. That Bible he has in his hand is a really neat opportunity I got. My students at NCU took an NIV Bible, and our school colors are blue and gold, theirs are blue and red, so we took a blue highlighter because it's a color we have in common, and then went through, and my students from NCU picked passages that they love that have always helped them get through college. And then I took that Bible and I delivered it to Alexis. And on our behalf, Alexis is going to share it with the honors program at Uganda Christian University. Brothers and sisters in Christ, separated by an ocean, living on different continents, but the same Bible gives them the encouragement and the wisdom that helps them get through the difficulty and the rigor of college. But if you look at Alexis, you think, what do I have in common with this man? Actually, could I see the next picture? This one's even better. This is Peter. Peter, oh my goodness. Peter graduated from Uganda Christian University a couple of years ago. They hired him to be a program assistant with the Uganda Studies program. He was there the first night when we got off the airplane with his smile even bigger than that. And all week long, he followed us around and he kept us from doing stupid things. He was very patient. He kept his eye on us. One of my favorite memories of the experience is getting to know Peter. Now, Peter was born and raised 9,000 miles from where we are. I Googled it. His first language was not English. He is not from the United States. His culture is very different. And look at us. We don't look a lot alike. You could go to downtown Eugene, and if you look long enough, you might have to go to Corvallis, you could pick someone who's almost a clone of me. You could find another college professor. You can't throw a rock in this town without hitting 20 college professors. You could find someone who's from the same part of the world, probably has a lot of likes and dislikes in common with me, and stand them right next to me. But the one thing that might be missing is that they think Jesus was a pretty cool teacher. And the Bible, well, it's important literature because it's part of our heritage. Now imagine that clone and me and Peter. In whose company do I belong? Where should I put my belonging? And what should I not be deceived into thinking says something about where I belong? The third lie that Satan tells us is that we should listen. We should listen to very loud voices, very visible voices, very public voices that try to tell us, you belong to this group, the other group is endangering you and threatening your way of life. They do this, I even talked about this last year when I came and spoke, they do this because it makes them money and it makes them powerful. And let me try to be as clear as I can. I think this nation does have enemies. I'm not blind to that. For about 40 years, the United States and the nation of Iran have been enemies. They're very open about it, but that's government to government. I have known a dozen people who went and traveled in Iran. And when an individual from the United States meets an individual from Iran, very often they strike up a friendship. And there are Christians in Iran. They have to be very discreet about how they live out their faith. But if you say, I'm an American and Iranians are my enemy, and your fellow followers of Christ live in Iran, then you've let a boundary, a group you belong to, become more important to you than your sisters and your brothers in Christ. And we shouldn't be doing that. Let me also be clear. I am not saying that we can't disagree passionately about politics. We can and we should. The powerful temptation, though, is to let the resentment spill over into hostility. And it should never be hostile. Wherever you are politically, there are people at other points in the spectrum who are mature, wise, sincere Christians. Now, sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. And we ought to keep listening to one another. What Satan wants to tempt us to do is to draw the line and say, I belong to my political bubble. They're in a different political bubble. They don't belong with me, and I don't belong with them. And then finally, don't misunderstand me. I think that when you get a bunch of homeless people in one place, there is danger. You will find addiction. You will find mental illness. You will find theft. You'll find all those things. But I have also seen too many people who live in my neighborhood, look like me, have my standard of living, wish suffering on those people, primarily out of fear. A minute ago, I showed you the picture of Alexis, but I skipped about one detail. I'm not going to tell you everything about it, but I'll tell you just enough that some of you will recognize it right away, and the others, you can do some Google searches or you can ask around. Alexis was not born in Uganda. Alexis was born in Rwanda. He's turning 25 this year. So he was born in 1994, the year of the genocide. He lives in Uganda because his family fled, because there were resentments between ethnic groups. And the one ethnic group referred to the other ethnic group as cockroaches, not worthy of life. And I have known people who identified publicly as followers of Christ who say similar things about some of the people here in the United States who sleep outdoors every night. And that's not okay, and that's not obedient. One last thing to say about this particular lie. The lie it often takes is to say these people who belong in a different group, they threaten you, they make you unsafe, they're a danger to your way of life. Sometimes that's true, often it's not. But even when it's true, there's a limit to how much we're permitted to do about it. Now, if you are in immediate danger, you shouldn't put the Lord God to a foolish test, that's for sure. But if someone is whipping up your fear of people who are different, think back on what the Bible teaches us about that. Only one of the apostles died of old age. All the rest died at the hands of their persecutors. On the other hand, you can read in the book of Isaiah in chapters 7 through 9 and in 2 Kings 16 about King Ahaz. King Ahaz was the king of Judah during part of the period that Isaiah was the prophet sent to Israel. And the kings of Damascus and the northern kingdom came to Ahaz and they threatened him. They said, form an alliance with us or we will topple you. So Isaiah went to King Ahaz and said, yes, you have earthly kings threatening you, but God is your protection. Don't do foolish things. Don't do disobedient things out of fear of other people. But Ahaz did. And he made an alignment with the Assyrian Empire, and he brought idol worship into Judah, and he sacrificed his own son as a burnt offering to Moloch because he was afraid of what humans were going to do to him, even though Isaiah told him, God has you protected. So the lies Satan tries to tell us. You know you belong when you're comfortable. You know you belong when people resemble you. And when someone tells you you're unsafe, you're in danger, then you should act to protect yourself from that danger and separate yourself from people that you don't think you belong with. So what should we do about this? Well, there's a lot of things we should do, but I'm going to start you off with three things we ought to do. The first thing we ought to do is walk by faith and not by sight. Walk by faith and not by sight. Now, what I mean by this is Jesus didn't have this problem. You look in John 2, verses 24 and 25. The crowds pressed in on Jesus, but Jesus didn't commit himself to any of them because he knew what was in a man. Flip up to John 10, verses 27 and 28, and Jesus says, my sheep know my voice. They recognize my voice. Nobody can pluck them out of my hand. Jesus knew where he belonged. Jesus knew who to select as apostles. Now, he knew because he depended on the Father. Before he picked his apostles, he prayed all night long. What we've got to do is be very skeptical of our instinct to stick to people who make us comfortable, to stick to people who are like us. And when we do that, we should be teaching ourselves to ask the question, this other group that I'm shying away from, is it possible there are followers of Christ in this group, and I've put myself into a group that I'm putting ahead of my loyalty to other people who are co-heirs with me in what Christ did for me? That's the first thing. Walk by faith, not by sight. The second thing follows from the first thing. There are a lot of sins, the ones where Satan does the best job of tempting us, where we get stubborn. And I am betting this one that I've been describing, that at least a few people in here would say, yeah, I do that sometimes, but I can't help it. I even know I shouldn't do it, but I can't help it. We do that with a lot of our decisions about money. We do that with some of our decisions about wanting our own way. or about chasing after pleasure so that we'll be included. Yeah, I know I shouldn't do those things, but I can't help it. I was brought up as a Texas Baptist, and one of our favorite things to do was to talk about temptation and to talk about how to resist the devil. And I must have heard 100 times my youth pastor quote James 4:7, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. That's a misquote, because it's not James 4:7, it's James 4:7b. Nobody ever wants to say the first half. The first half of that verse is humble yourself before God. If you've got the NIV, it's submit yourself to God. Take that stubbornness and put it out of the way. And say, God, I know that I'm being disobedient to you when I do this, and I can't figure out how to stop. I need your help. The third thing, when we humble ourselves, we also need to be bold. We need to be humbly bold, or maybe boldly humble. And you might be thinking, well, wait, those contradict. Because if you're going to be humble, you need to be meek. And if you're being bold, then you're going to be arrogant. I don't think they always do contradict. Let me tell you a very quick story. When I knew that I was going to travel to Uganda, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to learn a little bit of the language, because that's one of the ways you can humble yourself and show respect to the people that you're visiting, to not have to do all your talking in English, to talk a little bit in their own language. And at first I looked it up, and one of their official languages is Swahili. Great, I learned some Swahili in college. I'll just brush it up. Then I found out, oh no. It may be one of their official languages, but most of them don't speak it and they don't like it. And I read a little bit more and found out where we were going, the most widely spoken language is called Luganda. So I learned a little bit of Luganda. When I started this morning, Jebaleko means hi. Wasuze Ocha means how are you? It literally means how did you sleep? Nasuze Balunji means I am well, and literally it means I slept well, which is a lie. I didn't sleep that well last night. But I learned a little bit of that, and then my first day in Uganda, I got an attack of stage fright. Because I remembered something that I teach in my intercultural class. In Uganda, they speak 50 different languages. And I heard someone mention offhand that when they started college, they had to learn Luganda, and I thought, oh my gosh, what if I walk up to someone and I speak Luganda to them and they just look baffled? I'll embarrass them, and I will come across as the clumsy and oblivious American. So all that time I spent learning Luganda, just kept my mouth shut. Through Monday, through Tuesday, through Wednesday. Thursday nights, they sent us out to have dinner with families in Mukono. And I had dinner with Mama Elizabeth. Mama Elizabeth, she went all out. It looked like Thanksgiving. Table was covered with food. And she happened to mention in passing something that had happened earlier that day where she had to think of the right Luganda words. I thought, she speaks Luganda. So we were winding it down, and she said, I'd like us all to pray together. And I said, Mama Elizabeth, with your permission, I would like to bless you in Luganda. Because one of the things I had learned was the priestly blessing, number 6, 24 through 26 in Luganda. And she said, okay, you may. And I did. And I stumbled 2 or 3 times, and I had to start one line completely over. And when I opened my eyes, her eyes were shining. She was deeply touched. The next morning, Friday, our last full day in Uganda, we all got in a circle and we all prayed, both the professors from the United States and the locals from Uganda. And once again, I blessed all of them in Luganda. And Peter was just 2 positions over from me in the circle, and right after we all said amen, he came over to me and his eyes weren't shining. He was bouncing up and down. You speak Luganda! You speak Luganda! And on Saturday, we were flying out Saturday night, but right after breakfast, he said, come with me. I want to give you a tour of the campus. A tour of the campus? It's the last day. We had a tour the first day. I've been walking around this campus every day. What are you up to? He walked me around and showed me a few things I hadn't seen before, but we kept bumping into people he knew. And he would say a couple of sentences to them, and then he would turn to me and say, speak Luganda, speak Luganda. And I would say, Shebaleko, Wasuze Otya. And whoa, their faces would just light up. So what I am saying is go to people who are different. And even when you feel out of your elements, and even when you feel uncomfortable, be bold. But be bold in the service of being humble. So you may be thinking that I am hanging a lot on Luke 14:26. So to wrap this up, I'm going to take you to Matthew 12:46 to 50. Matthew 12:46 to 50, Jesus was teaching, and his disciples said, your mother and your brother are outside. They want to see you. And Jesus said, who are my mother and my brothers? these are my mother and my brothers. All those who do the will of my Father in heaven are my mother and my brothers. So to close this in prayer, what I would like to do with your permission is to bless all of you with the priestly blessing in English and in Luganda. I'm going to try. I rehearsed it several times. We're going to see how this goes. The Lord bless you and keep you. Mukama aku mukisa akukume. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Mukama akwakiza masuge akukwachiwekisa. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Mukama akwimusiza masuge akuwe mirembe. Amen. Webalenyo, thank you very much. Siwa bulungi. Have a good day.
Wow, thank you.